So, good afternoon, students. So, today we'll continue from the previous lecture. So, in the previous lecture, we have seen some topics like digital evidence. So, what are the types of evidences? Physical evidence, digital evidence, and documentary evidence, oral evidence, etc. Right. So, this was the last topic which we had covered in our previous class. Physical versus digital evidence. So there are two types of evidences which can be classified as physical evidence as well as digital evidence. In the previous class we have also seen several types of digital evidences. So your digital evidence can be oral, it can be documentary evidences. So most of the time we are going to deal with the documentary evidence. Okay, so physical evidence, there is a possibility of tampering the physical evidence, but when you tamper physical evidence, it leaves some discernible marks. So similarly, digital evidence, there are multiple options here. It may not be tampered directly. So criminals may just make unauthorized copies of the digital evidence to know what kind of information is there in digital evidence, and so that they can devise their own strategy. There is also possible that you can also alter digital evidence, and when you alter digital evidence, there is a possibility that you can erase the marks. So digital evidence is, when altered, never leaves any trace. Okay, so when you make unauthorized copy of the digital evidence, you will not even come to know that its copies have been made. Okay. So next, we are going to deal with the digital evidence. When we say digital evidence, some digital evidences can be volatile, some may not be volatile. So volatile in the sense, the data which is not permanently stored, which can be easily destroyed. So you have to take care of volatile digital evidence first. You have to copy, or you have to make authorized copy of volatile digital evidence first. Then you can deal with the non-volatile digital evidence. So just one example, the data stored in RAM is volatile. That means whenever you restart the system, whatever data is stored in the RAM is data stored in the RAM will be lost. Okay, so that's why you should never restart the system. You should never alter the state of the system. If the system is switched on, you have to take the backup of RAM first. You have to copy the data from RAM first. If your system is switched off, still you have to copy the data from the RAM first. Okay. Then what is non-volatile data? The data stored in hard disks. Okay, hard disk drives, SATA drives. Okay, the data stored on CD-ROMs, floppy drives. These are all non-volatile data. That means once the data is written, it is stored permanently there until it is corrupted by some mechanism or by environmental factors. Okay. So first, the order is, you can see in the diagram, whenever you are recording the evidence, whenever you are copying the data from computer devices, digital evidence, first thing you need to copy the data from CPU, cache memory and CPU's registers. Then you should go to the routing table, ARP cache, process table and kernel statistics. Then next, you should collect data from the memory of your system, computer system. Then you should copy temporary file system and the files which are stored in swap space. Then you should move to data stored on hard disk. The next, remotely logged data can be copied. After this, you need to consider physical configuration and network topology data. And lastly, data content on archival media. So this is the order you need to follow whenever you are recording digital evidence. This is very, very important. This order is very, very important. If you miss this order, then there is a possibility that you may lose some important evidence. Okay. So the top one is highly volatile digital evidence, and last one is least volatile digital evidence. Okay. Now the data stored in CPU, cache or register content, it is volatile. That means in the order of nanoseconds, and the data can change in no time. So therefore, the forensic examiner must record this data before they are lost. So that's why you should record the data in the present state of the system. If you change the state of the system, then you may lose the data. Then routing table, ARP cache, process tables, kernel statistics. So this may refer to the data located on network devices. Okay, you may not find this data on your local machine. So you will find this data on servers, on network devices like router, bridges. Okay. Again, these are subject to change whenever they are in operation. So kernel statistics correspond to the data moved back and forth between the memory and the cache. So this data has to be collected very quickly. When I say memory, it is the random access memory. So you have to gather the data from RAM immediately, because if there is a sudden power failure and if there is no power backup, the data may be lost. Okay. Then temporary file system or swap space. So generally you can say that the data stored in temporary files or swap space is semi-volatile. Okay. That's because even if you switch off the system, the data will be there in temporary files or on swap space for some time. Okay. Or until you erase this data. Generally you find that there are some softwares like system tweak softwares, okay, using which you can easily delete the files stored in swap space and files stored in temporary space. This is to improve the performance of a system. So those who are tech savvy, they usually keep on cleaning the temporary files and swap space. Okay. So until and unless it is intentionally erased, you can get the data from these two locations. But this data also gives very important information and plays very important role in legal proceedings, because it gives the information about your activity on that particular system. The next, data on the hard disk. So data on the hard disk is very, very important. So before somebody formats it, before somebody deletes it, you need to copy the data from the hard disk. But let's assume that some people have deleted the data. There are softwares which can recover the deleted data from the hard disk. Even if your hard disk is corrupt, still we can recover data from the hard disk. That is because we need to understand the mechanism how the data is stored on the hard disk. Okay. So generally when you create a file, what happens is some space is allocated on the hard disk, and when you create a name, that name points to that particular location where the data is stored. And when you delete the data, actually the contents are not deleted, only this link is deleted. Okay. So without this link, you will not be able to identify the location. And what these recovery softwares do, they establish the link between your user interface and the memory location. So you may not get the exact file name, but some random link name will be assigned. But using that, you can access the deleted data. Okay. So similarly, your hard disk may be corrupted. So in that case, you need some specialized tools which can extract the data from track by track or sector by sector. Okay. So likewise, there was one software in earlier days when we were students. We used to use that software known as ISO Buster. So when we were students, DVDs and CD drives were very popular. Okay. But over the time, those devices used to get some scratches on their surfaces. So it was very difficult to play such CD-ROMs or DVD drives because of the scratches sometimes. So what we used to do was use this ISOBuster software or similar software, extract the data from the CD drive or DVD drive and store it on our hard disk and continue working with that data. Okay. The next is the remotely logged data. So this category of data is more prone to change than the data on the hard disk, but is not as important as the data on the hard disk. Okay. So remotely logged data may be important, may not be important based on the circumstances. Let's say, for example, you are not performing anything remotely, or nobody is logged remotely on your network, on your system, so it may not be of much importance. But if we observe the current scenario, due to COVID-19, most of the activities are happening online. Say, for example, employees are working from home. They are using VPN software or they are using some software, right, to do their work. So they can connect to their office servers from their home. Similarly, professors are taking classes online. Okay. Many people are conducting meetings online. But what about the security of this infrastructure? Okay. What happens when you are connected through your unsecure home network to your office network? So in that case, remotely logged data becomes an important information. So it is highly circumstantial. Now, physical configuration and network topology. So in this network cache, remote logs on firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and proxy servers and several other devices data can be recorded. So again, this data is highly vulnerable, so it can be changed quickly, but again not of much importance. Then the data content on the archival media. So it's nothing but the data stored on your CD drives or DVD drives. So generally what happens, people have a fear that their system may crash anytime. So for that purpose they take the backup of their data. Okay, some of the important data they don't want to lose, because data is everything nowadays. Okay. So they write the data on a separate hard disk, or they write the data it on a DVD-ROM or DVD drive or CD-ROM and store it somewhere else. So this is the archive data. Okay. And it is very important from the investigation point of view. So next topic is list of crimes and probable location of evidence. In the first chapter we have seen different offenses, different types of cyber crimes, and we have classified those crimes: crimes against individual, crimes against nation, and crimes against property. So in crimes against or offenses against individual, we have child abuse and pornography, then we have network intrusion, then we have homicide, then domestic violence, then email threats, stalking and harassment. In offenses against nation, we have narcotics, we can also have cyber terrorism. Then offenses against property, we have computer fraud, we have financial fraud and counterfeiting, then we have software piracy, then we have telecommunication fraud, then lastly we have identity theft. Okay. So we are not going to discuss these things again, because we have already discussed these things in the first unit. So you can revisit first unit, and I hope you remember all these things. So we will discuss today, when this particular type of crime happens, where to look for evidence. Say for example, if there is a crime against individual, let's assume it's domestic violence. Okay. Then where to look for evidences related to domestic violence. Okay. It is very important. You cannot just collect everything and you cannot present everything as evidence. You should know what kind of crime it is, and you should know what can be seized and what cannot be seized. Okay. Now let's look at these crimes one by one, and let's discuss where to look for evidence for a particular crime. Now, if there is a child abuse and pornography crime, then you should look for chat logs. Okay. It can be chat logs, means it can be Telegram, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, SMSs, then images, then digital camera software, internet activity logs, email, mobile files, games, graphic editing and viewing softwares. Okay. Why? Because these are the softwares which are used by the criminal for child abuse and child pornography. Okay. So you should look for these kinds of softwares, or software which can give you this data, because most of the times children will play games, they will use digital camera software, they will access internet, right? They may be involved in chats also. The next is network intrusion. So with respect to network intrusion, you should look for evidence in the address books, configuration files of the network, email, then executable programs in the network or on the network, then internet activity logs, it can be network log also, then the source code, then the text files with usernames and passwords. If homicide happens, then you should look for address books, email, financial records, internet activity logs, legal documents and wills, medical records, telephone records, diaries, maps, and photos. Okay. If domestic violence happens, then you should collect the address books, diaries, email, financial asset records, and telephone records. So these are the sources of evidence for domestic violence. Then similarly for email threats, stalking and harassment, you should look for evidence in the address books, diaries, email, financial asset records, images, internet activity logs, legal documents, telephone records. Okay, so internet activity logs can be your browser data. It can also be your activities on the social networking sites like Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. Then offenses against nation, narcotics. So narcotics deals with drugs. So you can say smuggling of drugs comes into picture here. So to control the narcotics, there is a separate board called a narcotics control board. Okay. So if there is a narcotics related crime or drug related crime, then you should look for address books, calendars, then the database of various stakeholders, then drug recipes, emails, financial asset records, and internet activity logs. Now when we come to the third one, that is offenses against property, the first one is computer fraud. So you are using computer as a medium to commit a fraud. So in that case you should look for account data available online, address books, calendar, chat logs, then credit card data, databases, digital camera software, email, and financial records. Now when it comes to financial fraud and counterfeiting, you should look for currency and money order images, databases, email, financial asset records, images of signature, online banking software, bank logs, and credit card numbers. Okay. See, note here, we are also collecting the images of signature. That is to check whether the signature is authentic or is it a fake signature. Okay. The next comes to software piracy. So when it comes to software piracy, you should look for chat logs, emails, internet activity logs, image files of software certificates, software serial numbers, and software cracking utilities. Okay. Why software serial numbers is, these are all illegal information. That means these software serial numbers have not been obtained using legal way. So they have been downloaded from some hacking websites or they have been purchased from the dark web. Okay. So there are also software cracking utilities. So all these comes under digital evidence with respect to software piracy crime. Then telecommunication related fraud. So here you should look for electronic serial numbers, mobile identification numbers, emails, internet activity logs, financial asset records, cloning software, and customer database records. Okay. Often many criminals, they use mobile phones to commit a crime, right? So they may threaten you to come to a particular location. So the telecommunication records, like from where the call has come, under which network center it is, at what time call has come. So all this becomes very important data. Then identity theft. So hardware and software tools, internet activity related to ID theft and identification templates. These are the location for looking for digital evidence with respect to identity theft crime. So next, so what we have seen till now is what is the evidence, then order of seizing the evidence based on the volatility. Then next we have discussed where to look for evidence with respect to particular crime. Okay. The next, acquisition and seizure of evidence. So when we say acquisition of evidence, you need to create a bit perfect copy. Bit perfect copy. So bit perfect copy means you are not copying the data file by file or block by block or folder by folder. Okay. So when you follow this approach, you may miss out some data. So that's why you need special software can acquire the data and which can create a bit perfect copy of the data. Because even a single change in the bit, single bit change may result into not consideration by legal institution. So even a single change in the bit may make it inadmissible in the court. Okay, so it is very important to create a bit perfect copy. So there are softwares. You need to use those specialized softwares and you can create bit perfect copy. So one such software is Norton Ghost, which can create bit perfect copy of your entire hard disk or entire drive. Okay. The next is hot data acquisition and cold data acquisition. So hot data acquisition is you are making the bit perfect copy of the data from the system which is on. Okay. Then cold data acquisition is you are creating the bit perfect copy of the system when the system is turned off. Okay. Note here that both the techniques are used, hot data acquisition and cold data acquisition. Okay. Let us assume that there is an office or there is a browsing center where the crime has happened. Okay. And investigation officer visits the browsing center and he finds that there are some systems which are on. So he should not turn off them. Okay. While those systems are on, he should make the bit perfect copy of the data from those systems. This is hot data acquisition. Similarly, if some systems are turned off, he should not on them. He should not turn on them. Okay. So again, he should make a bit perfect copy of the hard disks of those turned off systems and acquire the data. Okay. So it's very simple. Hot data acquisition means you are making the bit perfect copy of turned on system which is on. Cold data acquisition means you are making the bit perfect copy from the system which is off. Okay. There is one important measure, as I have already discussed. You should not alter the state of the system. So what is the state of the system? State of the system is, if the system is on, you should leave it on and make the bit perfect copy of the data from the system. If the system is off, don't turn on. So without turning on the system, you should make the bit perfect copy of the data. So turning off and turning on will result into loss of information, loss of evidence. Okay. So we may lose the important data which is stored in the RAM, which may be stored in say cache files or swap space or temporary files. Or most importantly, we will lose the data which is stored in CPU register. Okay. Now there is a standard operating procedure which needs to be followed during the investigation of the crime scene. So what this standard operating procedure includes? The first one is that the electronic communication device or the ECD should be quarantined so that no one can tamper with the data and the data is free from corruption and damage. Okay. The next thing which is part of standard operating procedure is the status of the electronic communication device has to be ascertained if it is live. Its status should be recorded using photographs. Turning on a system that is turned off may result in changes being made by the operating system in the background which will change the evidence. So that's what I was explaining earlier. You should never change the state of the system. And also it is very important that if the system is on, take a photograph of it and say the system is off. You should record it. The state of system has to be recorded. If the system is off, then also you should record it and say that system is off. The next, the device should be disconnected from the internet or network at the earliest. However, care should be taken to ensure that this does not result in any loss of information. This should especially be taken care of in mobile phones, as it may bring about changes to its internal data, which would otherwise have been useful to the investigation. So here, if your system, it may be laptop, it may be mobile device or any device, if it is connected to the internet, the first thing you should be doing is disconnect from the internet. If you don't disconnect, then it may result into change of evidence, change of data, because we don't know what happens. That's because there are several apps installed on our mobile phone which are sending the data in the background. So similarly, if your system is compromised, if your mobile is compromised, then if hacker comes to know, or if the criminal comes to know that your device is being monitored or it has some important evidence, so he may try to delete the data remotely. So to avoid that, it is very important to disconnect the device from the internet. So other than portable devices, all electronic devices should be powered off and safely shut down. Okay, so this is very, very important. The next, all electronic gadgets should be seized along with their power cords. Okay, if power cords are not there, then if they lose their power, if the battery is over, then you cannot recharge them and you may not get those power cords to recharge the system, or you may not have sufficient time sometimes to find out the criminal and so on. Then to search and seize the evidence, there are some steps which you need to follow. Okay. So first one is identifying and securing the crime scene. Then second one is documentation of the crime scene. Then third one is collection of evidence. Then fourth one is labeling and documentation of the evidence. Then last one is packaging and transportation of evidence to the court. So if you try to recollect, if you have seen some detective serials or detective movies, okay, let's say for example CID, okay, so you might have seen that the police officers were performing all these steps. Okay, so the first one is identifying and securing the crime scene. So how they will come to know that this is a crime scene? They will get the information from witnesses. maybe from direct witnesses or indirect witnesses. Okay, so they will go to the crime scene and they will secure the crime scene. Okay, so officially they will identify and secure a crime scene whenever they receive a complaint. Okay, whenever the FIR is registered. So the first thing they do is they restrict the access to the public to the crime scene. So you might have seen the yellow tape is used. So beyond that, nobody is allowed to enter into the crime scene. Okay. The next is documentation of the crime scene. So here the investigation officer prepares a report that exactly reflects the crime scene. Okay, so that means which devices were there, what were the position of the device, if there was a dead body, what was the position of the dead body, what were found near the dead body. Okay, what items were found, what objects were found. Okay, what are the fingerprints. Okay, are there any broken things, are there any blood drops, so and where it was. So all these things are documented. The next is the collection of evidence. So here the investigation officer gathers the evidence that exists physically, such as the user manuals, then the passwords, then other login credentials, so which are available as hard copy, then electronic communication devices that hold digital evidences, for example laptops, mobile phones, personal digital assistants, or maybe smart gadgets, etc., etc. Then the fourth step is labeling and documentation of the evidence. So all evidences gathered are labeled and details of it are documented by the investigation officer. Now the last step is packaging and transportation of the evidence to the court. So all the collected evidences are packed so as to be safe during the transit to the court and are produced before the court. So if proper packaging is not done, then there is a possibility of altering the evidence or corrupting the evidence or losing the evidence. So it should be appropriately packaged and transported safely. So these are the steps in crime scene investigation. Okay. This is the format of a seizure memo. So you just cannot seize everything. Okay, you need to seize those items for which, for the crime, you have received the complaint. Okay, so we have seen earlier what are the different locations for digital evidences related to a particular crime. Okay, so you should take prior permission and you should include that in your search warrant. If you don't include it in your search warrant, then that may not be admissible in the court. Okay, so you can see here, this is a format of a seizure memo. So what is written here? To be sent to the court without any delay. Okay, so the delay may cause the loss of importance of the evidence. So here in this seizure memo it is written that a search was undertaken on date at the place, and it consists the items which were seized. So there is a table. The table consists of following fields: serial number, description of the items seized, quantity, and the remarks. Okay. Then it is written here, the items seized were sealed and packed as under. The name and signature of the investigating officer. Then you need 2 witnesses. So you need to record the signature of the witness, date, then name and address of the witnesses. So signature, name and address of the person in charge of the premise is searched for receiving this letter after the search. So for example, if there's a hotel manager or if there's a owner, so his sign has to be taken. If they search your house, then your signature will be taken and your name and address will be recorded. So the seizure memo should include the following information by the investigation officer. So first one, the reasons as to why the search is necessary from the facts and circumstances of the case or the offense. Then second one, description of the place and the location of the occurrence of the offense. Then third one is names of the witnesses. Fourth one is data and time when search commenced and closed. Fifth one is owner of the premises or electronic communication device suspected of holding the evidence. And unique identification details of the ECD such as the serial numbers, make and model. Then the reasons for seizure. Then date and time for seizure. Then photograph, video of the entire process of seizure in the presence of witnesses. The seizure memo is prepared in the presence of two independent witnesses and the evidences seized are labeled, sealed and packed in their presence, after which the seizure memo is signed by the witnesses. The next is documentation containing the names of the people who were in the possession of physical and electronic evidence during the seizure, custody, control, transfer and disposition. Now note here that there are different steps here in the investigation. First one is seizure, then the custody, then control, then transfer and disposition. And for each of these steps, there may be a different person who is responsible for these steps. Okay, so chain of custody defines this. Who will be responsible in the seizure step or seizure stage? Who will be responsible in custody stage? Who will be responsible in control stage and transfer stage and disposition? There is also a digital evidence collection. So this digital evidence collection form has three parts. One is standard details, the next one is system information, and the third one is evidence driven information. So in standard details we have general details like the crime number, then the applicable section of the law. So these things have to be related. Okay, we just can't assign any law for any crime number. So we should know what kind of crime it is and what are the applicable sections of the law for a particular crime. Date when the device was seized. Then the name of the investigating officer. Then last, the place from where the evidence was acquired. Okay. Then the next section is system information. In system information, you should record the device type which is used to collect the evidence. Then the manufacturer information of the device, model number of the device, serial number of the device, whether the acquisition was done at the crime scene or in a forensic lab. So you should say yes or no. If yes, then the actual date or time of acquisition of evidence. Then you should also record the time zone if it is international crime and you are collecting the evidence from different time zones. Then the BIOS information about the device, such as BIOS date or time. Then the evidence number. So unique number for every device with respect to the crime has to be assigned, and that evidence number you should put in a digital evidence collection form. Then evidence drive information. So type of media, what kind of media it is. Is it a hard disk drive or a USB drive, floppy drive, CD drive or a DVD drive? Nowadays we are getting flash drives, SATA drives, then SSD drives, Ultra HD drives, etc., etc. Then what kind of hard disk drive it is? If it is a hard disk drive, is it a SATA or is it a IDE? Is it SCSI? Is it solid state device? Okay. If it is USB, then what is the version of the USB? USB 2, 3 or USB 10? Okay. Then the name of the manufacturer, then model number of the device, serial number of the device, then number of logical partitions. Okay, if it is a hard disk, then definitely there will be multiple partitions. We don't find logical partitions many times on USB drives, but some people have logical drives on USB drives also. Then the general information, then the forensic software used for acquisition. Have you used CyberCheck Suite or the software used by NCASE, or you have used FTK, that is forensic toolkit. Then write protect device type. So write protection is very important. Okay. If it is not write protect, then there is a possibility of changing the evidence. Then the drive's information. So you should include the original information as well as the image information. Then name of the image file and its format. Then other details of the acquisition. Then Fourth Amendment and seizure. So in brief, we'll discuss what is Fourth Amendment and seizure. So Fourth Amendment deals with the person's right to protect his privacy. So what can be protected and what cannot be protected. So we just can't go and search anybody's house. We need a search warrant. But it is not always true. Okay, that is what it says. There can be warrant-based searches or warrantless searches. Okay, there are two types of searches. Now the search warrant, it gives the investigating officer the authority to search for particular location for evidence. It gives the permission to the investigating officer to enter the premises of the crime scene and to search for objects and devices named in the warrant and seize them. Note here that you should know, that's why you should study first the complaint. When you study the complaint, you will come to know what kind of crime it is. Then based on the crime, you know where to search for evidence. You know different locations of the evidence. And that needs to be mentioned in the search warrant. Okay? If you see some item which is not mentioned in the search warrant, and if it is an important evidence, then gone. You cannot produce it in the court as an evidence. So that's why you should take extra care to include everything in the search warrant. There may be standard documentation related to these crimes to make their work easy, so that they may not miss any item from being seized. Then warrantless searches. So in warrantless searches we have stop and open field, then automobile, then subpoena, then search incident to arrest, then exigent circumstances. So one example I will give you for warrantless searches. Whenever you go to the airport, there is a security check. So that's the best example for stop and frisk procedure. So for you students, you are writing an examination and we feel that there is a copy chit in your pocket. We come to you and we just check your pockets. So that is stop and frisk procedure. Similarly, in open field, if you find that can be evidence in the public place, then we can go for it. Similarly, if you feel that there is some vehicle where some evidence can be there, we have investigating officers have the authority to search for that evidence, for the evidence in that particular vehicle. Okay, and so on. So remaining topics we'll cover in the next class. Thank you.